Okay, thank you for your patience. I really appreciate it.
I have 2 seconds left.
In the nick of time, we have started recording our 10th session on Megillat Esther, chapter 6. This lesson is sponsored by Xenia and Jeffrey Cohen in honor of their 50th anniversary, and also sponsored by Anonymous. So we want to thank both of you, all of you, for your support, and we welcome this wonderful crowd of ladies, Hadassah ladies, to our lesson today. Let's begin with chapter 6. Now, if we consider that chapter 4 that we learned was the big reveal of the plot of Esther, of the Megillat Esther, if that's where we learned in chapter 4 what the story and the problem of the situation was, then in chapter 5, we called it the psychological health of all our characters, where Esther embraces her Judaism, Mordecai has stepped back, and Esther takes charge of the situation, and Haman, we see, is obsessive compulsive and is losing control. His hatred is eating him up. So we find how insane he is. And chapter 6 we can call the beginning of the end. On many levels, it's the beginning of the end. We'll see what I mean. And as we begin reading chapter 6, Xenia, since you're sponsoring today, would you like to read chapter 6 to us?
Yeah. Okay. All right. That night, sleep deserted the king, and he ordered the book of records, the annals, to be brought, and it was read to the king. There it was found written that Mordecai had denounced Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, who had plotted to do away with King Ahasuerus. What honor or advancement has been conferred on Mordecai for this? The king inquired. Nothing at all has been done for him, replied the king's servants, who were in attendance on him. Who is in the court? The king asked. For Haman had just entered the outer court of the royal palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai impaled on the stake. That was what it said on mine. He had prepared for him. It is Haman standing in the court, the king's servants answered him. Let him enter, said the king. Haman entered, and the king asked him, what should be done for a man whom the king desires to honor? Could you finish this? I just need to talk to Jeffrey for 1 second. Can somebody else take over? Thank you.
Absolutely. Becky, can you continue? Becky? Okay.
Oh, you know what? I can go.
Okay, go ahead. All right, go ahead.
Sorry. Okay. I just have to find Haman's. What should be done for a man whom the king desires to honor? Haman said to himself, whom would the king desire to honor more than me? So Haman said to the king, for the man whom the king desires to honor, let royal garb which the king has worn be brought, and a horse on which the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal diadem has been set. Okay, crown and set. And let the attire and the horse be put in charge of one of the king's mobile courtiers. And let the man whom the king desires to honor be attired and paraded on the horse through the city square while they proclaim before him, this is what is done for the man whom the king desires to honor. Quick then, said the king to Haman, get the garb and the horse, as you have said, and do this to Mordecai the Jew, who sits in the king's gate. Omit nothing of all you have proposed. So Haman took the garb and the horse and arrayed Mordecai and paraded him through the city square. And he proclaimed before him, "This is what is done for the man whom the king desires to honor." Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate while Haman hurried home, his head covered in mourning. There Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had befallen him. His advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, "If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish stock, you will not overcome him. You will fall before him to your ruin." While they were still speaking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurriedly brought Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared.
Okay, well, this is quite the chapter. And this is an interesting perspective of, as I said, the beginning of the end, as we can see for Haman. Now, let's go through this today.
Question.
Yes.
I have a question. It says, excuse me, the king is asking Haman about Mordecai the Jew. How does he know that he's Jewish right now? Did Esther tell him before?
Well, we assume that when Esther told whoever to tell the king and put it in the book of Chronicles or book of remembrances, that he is identified as Mordecai the Jew because he's the one who sits at the king's gate.
Okay.
I don't know whether in the ancient world people were identified by like it would be Ronda the Modian person or Ronda the Jew or Ronda the Southerner, or right, I don't know how people are identified, but it seems that Mordecai is always called Mordecai the Jew.
My Megillah has a comment that says that Haman said, "Well, there must be many Jews named Mordecai," but then the king said he's the one who sits at the gate.
Yes, that's right. That's a midrash. So yes, yeah, there probably were a lot of Mordecais, but there was only one Mordecai the Jew who did sit by the king's gate. And that's the one that the king wished to honor. So let's start with pasuk number 1. That night sleep eluded the king, and he orders for the book of records or remembrances. In Hebrew, it's called Sefer Zichronot, remembrances, to be brought and read to him. And there is an interesting commentary that allegorically, when it says that night sleep eluded, and it's capital K for capital King, it could refer to God. Now, God doesn't slumber, nor does he sleep, but it could be that now God is getting involved, more so than at any other point, that God is now not sleeping. He is now manipulating all the players on his chessboard for the story of Megillat Esther. And here he is causing the king, small k king, to be not able to sleep. And so the book is brought before the king and is read to him. And there it's noted, the king hears that, Ahasuerus hears that Mordecai has saved his life. And he asks the servant who's reading, what has happened to, has Mordecai been rewarded for this? Now,
Rhonda, this
yes.
is Mindy. Can I ask a question?
Yes.
When it says Sefer HaZichronot, could there
Yes.
be any connection between that and the the book we refer to on Yom Kippur, Sefer Zechuyatenu?
No,
No,
no, this is a book that the king, there's many books that kings and have their scribes record their book Yom Yoredea, and the chronicles and the activities of the kingdom,
Okay.
etc. So this is a book of remembrances, things that the king, his personal book of things he wants to remember. It's not the chronicles of what has happened on a daily basis in the kingdom.
okay.
So at this point, it is fortuitous in some ways. Now we learned in the previous chapter that Zeresh has told Haman, because he's so agitated that Mordecai did not bow down to him when he came out of the palace and he came home. Remember, he had asked all his friends and his wife to gather around him, and he recounts how lucky he is and how wonderful he has so many sons, and he's blessed with wealth, and he's blessed with good advisors. But the one thing that's troubling this man, this killing him, it's eating his neshama, is that Mordecai the Jew still lives and does not give him honor. So now Zeresh has told Haman, okay, honey, well, this is what we can do. Go build a big, tall gallows and you can hang him, but you have to go in the morning. In the morning is the key here. Go in the morning and then tell the king you want to kill Mordecai. I'm sure he'll let you kill him. You're number two. You have this decree that you're going to kill all the Jews. What's one more? So Haman, in his obsessive compulsive behavior, cannot wait till morning. He leaves his home and he rushes over to the palace. He must be living in the neighborhood. And here the king can't sleep. And Haman enters the palace, Dafka, at the same moment that the name of Mordecai, the Jew, is being read to him for saving his life. So precisely at the time that Haman is building the gallows to hang Mordecai, God reverses the course of events. This is the beginning of the end. So the servant says, nothing has been done to reward Mordecai for saving your life. And in the same breath, in the very same breath, that you can't even count a beat between them. The king says, he says to the chamberlain, what has been done to confer honor on Mordecai for this? And the king asked, and the chamberlain says, nothing has been done. And the next sentence is, the king says, who's in the court? Who's in the courtyard? It's just, he's kind of disturbed to hear that there's someone outside his bed chamber, and the excuse me, the chamberlain says to the king, oh, it's Haman. Haman's out in the court. Now, Haman is so anxious to rid himself of Mordecai that he's draying around, the palace. He doesn't know where to go first, what to do. And so clearly he's making enough noise that the king can hear him. And the king says to his chamberlain, bring him in. Now, there are several commentators, clearly midrashic, which means stories about this. It's not in the text. The two things cross the king's mind. One is that the king couldn't sleep because he had had a dream that Haman was going to kill him. And two, the king couldn't sleep because Haman was having some type of an affair or relationship with Esther. Now we learned that the second one is on the king's mind because at the first banquet, what does Esther do? She invites the king and Haman, the only two guests, at her banquet, and this does not sit well with the king. He's wondering why in the world would she have this private party and invite the king, her husband, and Haman. So it leaves a sort of inference and bothers the king greatly that something is going on with Haman. He's not sure at this point what it is, but all of a sudden, it seems as if the king is not as trustworthy of Haman as he had been when he promoted him to become number 2 guy. So Haman comes into the king's chamber, and when Pasuk 6, when Haman comes in, the king right away doesn't have any chit chat with him. He goes straight to the crux of the matter, and the king says straight out to Haman, so what should be done for the man whom the king especially wants to honor? Well, in Haman's mind, and it says in parentheses in our English text and in the Hebrew that Haman, what does Haman do? He thinks to himself, well, there's nobody on this planet that the king would probably want to honor more than me. How deserving am I? So you can see the workings of Haman's mind. He has been devoured by self-confidence and conceit, so much so that he can't even think rationally. He is out of control. And so the king says to him, so Haman then answers right away, doesn't miss a beat. He says, for the man who the king especially wants to honor, that royal robes should be brought that the king has worn, and a horse that the king has ridden should be brought out, and that a royal crown should be put on his head. Now, whose head? The horse's head or the person that should be honor's head? The fact of the matter is, in the speech that the answer that Haman gives to the king, the word king or royal appears 8 times. Now that's a lot of king and that's a lot of royal for a man who is now describing what should be done to honor somebody who the king owes a debt to for some reason. Now, if you were the king and you heard your number 2 advisor talk this way, would it cross, and you're agitated that this guy has been at your wife and your private banquet, and now he's talking only about the king should wear this, the king should honor this, the king's horse, the king's crown, the king should, he should walk around and say, this is what the king wants to do for someone who he wants to honor. What would you be thinking of if you were the king? Anybody?
And he wants to take over as the king.
He wants to be king. You know, in the Lion King, I just can't wait to be king. Well, this is exactly what Haman is seemingly trying to convey, that the person and he thinks it's himself, should have all of these trappings of the king.
Rhonda,
Yes.
that maybe the gallows were built for him.
Wait a minute, what?
Maybe the king was also thinking, besides that Haman wants to take over for him, but maybe the king thinks that maybe Haman built those gallows to hang the king.
No, the king doesn't know anything about the gallows.
No, he doesn't know.
Doesn't know anything about it. It's just
Right.
happened. It just happened, you know, Haman has just left his house where the gallows are being built. So the king doesn't know anything about the gallows yet. Adele?
Well, I hate to bring in my kindergarten teaching, but this was always my favorite part is psychologically, because I said the king could have, Haman could have asked for anything. He thinks it's for him. He could have asked for a new house. He could have asked for money. He could have asked for anything. And he's showing his hand by saying the crown and the royal clothes and the king's horse. And I acted out with the kids that when the king is handing it over, like he's just anxious to put it on his own head because he's so sure that he's going to get this. This is what he chooses when the king will give him anything.
Right.
What he chooses.
Exactly. Well, as we know, Haman doesn't need money. He doesn't need anything.
He's rich.
He's rich. He has as he says admits himself in chapter 4. He says, I have everything. I have 10 sons. I have wealth. I have good friends. I have advisors. What else do I need? The only thing he needs is to kill the Jews, kill Mordecai, and be king. That's all he needs. He only needs what he doesn't have. So that's the ikar of this, is that he cannot be satisfied until he receives what he feels is due honor and due justice. So anybody else?
Like respect.
Okay, so interestingly enough, the king, when Ahasuerus is asking Haman what he would like to have done for the person who the king wants to honor, it is really almost implied in the text that the king understands that Haman's answer is going to be about him. Why? Because when in chapter 2, I believe, the king promotes Haman. He promotes him to being the number 2. It's after the decree has been sent out after the banquet about the every wife should listen to her husband and every man should be in charge of his home. This was after the Vashti incident. The king felt that that was good advice. And it says in the text that the king promoted and advanced Haman to be his number 2 person because he thought that Mordecai had given him good advice. Here in the text, it says in the Hebrew that he wants to know from Haman what would you do to honor, not promote and not advance, because the king possibly knows that if Haman is going to say what he wants, the only promotion that Haman could have as number 2 guy would be to become number 1 guy. And number 1 guy is the king. He couldn't possibly tell the king that he himself wants to be king. But by saying, take his crown, take his horse, take his clothing that he's worn, indicates that this is an honor that certainly is close to becoming king-like, right? So we see where Haman's thoughts are, and it's getting him into trouble. So if we look at the text, it says, the king says, immediately after Haman is finished, in pasuk number 10, it says, the king said to Haman, hurry, do exactly what you have just said. Don't omit anything. Don't leave out anything that you just said, and do it for Mordecai the Jew. What do you think Haman was thinking when he heard what the king had to say about the person to be honored?
I should only drop dead right now.
That's right.
He was plotting.
He was
a little
plotting,
dejected.
right. Haman was plotting here. That's right. He couldn't, he probably left so quickly because he couldn't contain himself, because the irony of this is that here he is coming to the palace to tell the king, or ask the king, I want to hang Mordecai the Jew. And the king is saying, you're going to honor Mordecai the Jew. Now, the question seems to be, the king didn't have any stable boy to do this, any servant to do it. Why is he asking Haman to do it? Well, this is another indication that the king feels that Haman's bubble needs to be burst a little bit, that he's acting a little bit too cocky and too big for his shoes. So the king is putting Haman in his place by saying, you do it, you take the clothes, you dress Mordecai, you take the horse, you take the crown, you put the crown on Mordecai's head, and you parade Mordecai around the city with the horse, saying this is what the king wishes to do to honor someone. Now,
So maybe the king was not as stupid as we've been making him out to be all this time.
well, I have been promoting the fact that I don't think the king is stupid. I don't think that he's a jolly old man and shusha long ago. I think that he is sometimes smarter than we think he is, and consequently, I think this is one more time that we see his actions speak on behalf of his understanding. Okay?
Is just a person who enjoyed his lifestyle and was involved in the merriment of being, the person that could make merry. And when his wife came to him and informed him differently, he actually had the brains to stop and think, well, maybe there's more to this than what meets the eye.
Right. Okay. So I want to share a very interesting pasuk with you that at this particular point, when Haman is escorted into the king and is asked the question, he is so excessively filled with pride and self-confidence that he, I'm sure, is shocked when the king says Mordecai the Jew. Now there's a proverb, the Mishlei, number 6, chapter 6 of Mishlei, pasuk 14 and 15, that says, deceitfulness is in his heart. He plots evil all the time. He incites quarrels. Therefore, calamity will come upon him without warning. Suddenly, he will be broken without repair. It's a very apropos description of Haman in Mishlei 6, pasuk 14 and 15. Now, I have a question for you. Haman has now gone to get the clothing of the king's clothing and his horse, and he has to go get Mordecai from the king's gate, and he has to bring Mordecai into the palace, and Mordecai is probably sitting there still in sackcloth, still, in mourning, and Haman now has to dress and prepare Mordecai to be paraded around the city. My question to you is, what do you think the conversation is between Haman and Mordecai at this very turn of events time? What do you think? Anybody? Can you
Is it
imagine?
It might have
He
been,
was probably cursing him and just, getting him up, but cursing him and under his breath, like an SS officer would have done in Nazi Germany. History repeated itself, and that's what I think that probably happened.
it was
Okay.
probably very begrudging. I mean, he probably was like, like saying, well, the king wants to do this, but obviously not with a happy face or anything, just, and probably the longer he thought about it and the longer then he had to do the process, the angrier he got, and until he was ready to explode, probably.
Right, exactly.
Maybe he said,
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead, Marilyn.
I was saying that he's probably saying, okay, I have to do this, but you wait. I'm gonna get you. I'm gonna get you and your people. You just wait. This is not the end.
Okay, someone else? Carol?
Yep. Yes, I wonder what Mordecai was doing in the middle of the night at the gate, and
Well-
also Haman in the middle of the night.
Well, by this time, it's probably morning. Dawn has at least broken he's gone to get the horse. It took time to do whatever he needed to do to prepare. I mean, we don't know exactly what time in the night that he did go to the palace. There are even Mefarshim who say that by the time Haman finished with the gallows, that it was really a daybreak, and that the king was up. There's a lot of different opinions at what time, that we don't know what time exactly, but whether it was nighttime or daytime, it could be that Mordecai still was at the king's gate. We don't know, but
It seems to me, Rhonda, it seems to me that with all the paraphernalia that he had to take, the robe and the everything, he
Right.
couldn't have gone alone. He must have taken some servants, or at least one servant with him. So if there was somebody else there who was faithful to the king, maybe he had to be careful how he spoke to Mordecai, because he wouldn't want anything bad to get back to the king. I don't know if that's a stretch or not.
no, maybe not. No, maybe not.
Actually, it's actually shocking to me that he didn't just take off and abandon the king. He must have known or had some inkling of what was going on. It's surprising that he just didn't take off for parts unknown. He had a horse and he could have run away.
Who,
Haman?
Haman?
Haman.
Would he run away?
Well, Haman wasn't running anywhere. He wasn't going anywhere, because Haman is not, look, Haman thinks this is like a little blip in his plan, but he doesn't see the big picture here. He doesn't see it at all. Not yet. Okay, so let's continue.
Rhonda,
Yeah.
we didn't talk about Mordecai, and I've always felt that he probably sitting there in the sackcloth and mourning, and Haman is coming with fancy clothes and the horse. He probably was really annoyed and angry that Haman is telling him he has to do this. I'm sitting in mourning, and you're telling me to dress up in nice clothes. And the more Mordecai fought this, like I'm in mourning, I'm sitting Shiva, and the more he fought it, the more Haman had to say, you have to do it, you have to do it, and which he didn't want to say, but you have to do it, this is the king's command. The more Mordecai didn't want to, and Haman is forcing himself to say, you have to do it. You have to do it.
Right.
I have a
Very good.
question.
Okay.
Rhonda,
that's
do we
good.
know, did he walk Mordecai on the horse before he went to the second banquet? Do we know that? He did.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
We haven't gotten to the second banquet. It's the morning of the second banquet, day of the second banquet. All right. So here with the situation with the horse, the episode with the horse and Haman taking Mordecai around the city, it's interesting that it should be interpreted as the Megillah has two separate stories, because if we did not have this episode where Haman is parading Mordecai around the city with on the horse, it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make a difference. It could have just, the king could have said, okay, Haman, go do what you just said, don't leave out a thing. And then the next scene could be the banquet. This does not make a difference. So the Mefarshim say, why is this in there? Why is this scene with a horse in the story if it has no meaning? Well, actually, it does have a meaning. And the meaning is that there are two simultaneous stories going on in the Megillah. One is that the story is of Haman and the Jewish people. That's the story number one about Megillat Esther. But story number two is about the relationship of Haman and Mordecai. And the Mefarshim say that the story of the horse represents Mordecai's personal victory over Haman, but it doesn't relate in any way to the story of Haman and the Jews. This has nothing to do with Haman and the Jews. This has to do with this, as in they say in the movies, this is personal. This is personal. This is Haman and Mordecai. So some say that this is a reference to the national struggle of Israel versus Amalek, or this is the story with Haman leading Mordecai in the streets that foreshadow the ultimate Jewish victory. And the words of Haman's and then after this episode is finished, Haman he probably leaves Mordecai at the palace to get back into either his clothing, his sackcloth, go back to the gate, whatever he does. Haman does not care what happens to Mordecai once he's done what he's had to do for the king. So what happens now, as we see in the text, that Haman leaves this scene. He has been thoroughly humiliated. He has had to walk Mordecai around the city yelling, this is what the king wants to do to honor a person. And he goes home, it says, with his head covered. Now, why is his head covered in mourning? It's like a reference to the fact that he is so embarrassed. He is so humiliated. Sometimes you see on the news when a criminal goes into court, they cover their head. They don't want the cameras to show their face. Well, Haman is completely humiliated. And now we see that at this point, we know that Haman was on the rise to success, but at this point, Haman is on the decline. Now, King Ahasuerus tells Haman to hurry because it seems that this whole scene, from the time that Esther goes into the king's chamber and is received by the king and tells the king, please come to a banquet that I have prepared today, that the word hurry is used over and over and over again to indicate that time is of the essence to get to the ikar, the crux of the problem. Everybody is in a hurry. Esther is in a hurry to tell the king she wants to save her people and her own life. The king is in a hurry to go back to the first and second banquet to find out what Esther wants. He still doesn't know what she wants from him. And Haman is in a hurry because he wants to kill Mordechai the Jew. Everybody is in a hurry. This is a very, as we say, a lachutz situation, a very stressful and horrified kind of time period where all the characters are in a hurry to accomplish what they seem to have to do in the story. So while we see that speediness is of the essence during this particular chapter, we also find that when Haman arrives home, let's read this, and I'm sure, I read this pasuk over several times because I'm not sure that I got this every year that I listen to the Megillah. But tell me what you think, okay? Did you ever think this is what was said? Let's go, please, to pasuk. Pasuk number 13.
Yeah.
He goes home, okay? Haman is despondent, his head is covered, and he says to his wife and all his friends everything that has happened to him. And then the Megillah refers to the people he goes home to as his friends. But in the next moment, it says that his advisors and his wife.
Yeah, his wise men.
Okay, his advisors or his wise men tell him this. Now listen to this and tell me if you ever heard this, if you ever were conscious of this before. The advisors, and then it says, and basically Zeresh agrees, if Mordechai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him, but will undoubtedly fall before him. Now, what are these friends, so-called friends and advisors and his wife saying to Haman?
Well, we've already talked about the fact that he didn't want to do it in the month of Nisan because God seems to have a preference for the Jews at that time. It's Pesach. It's when, I guess I got that right.
No, go ahead.
And they know, the people recognize that there is a power that is that for the Jews. They recognize, they don't believe in it or anything, But I think they all recognize at this point that there's something going on in the Jews' favor.
Okay.
Rhonda,
Yes.
in my text, it says, his wise men, who perhaps significantly are no longer described as his supporters.
Exactly.
And his wife said to him dispassionately.
Right. So it's as if everybody now, once they have heard what he had to do with Mordecai in the streets, with the horse and the royal garb, it's as if everybody now is jumping ship. It seems as though the advisors and even his wife agree that there is no hope for Haman at this point. And it seems strange that they say if he's of Jewish descent, didn't Haman say when he came in, Mordecai the Jew is bothering me so much, what should I do? Were they not listening? Were they not absorbing what this man was telling them? So clearly, all of a sudden, the winds of fortune are not so much on Haman's side, even his friends / and wise men advisors and his wife, because she concurs.
He was blaming her.
What?
He was actually blaming her for the advice that she gave him. He's probably cursing the fact that he didn't do it right away.
Okay, well, I think that he's probably very disappointed, to say the least. But if you read the Hebrew text, the Hebrew word for the decline and for falling, you're gonna fall, is nafel. So the Mefarshim say that Haman's only hope to redeem himself at this point, if he wanted to turn anything around at this point, would be to go to Mordecai and fall before him, bow before Mordecai, and beg for Mordecai's forgiveness and dismantle the gallows. That would have been the first sign of repentance, and perhaps to go and revoke the decree. If he was so in love with himself and still had his wits about him, he would have known that that was his only way out of this situation, but he doesn't see that at all. He doesn't see it. He is still hopeful that going to the banquet with the king and the queen will prove to be in his favor. So as we, did someone want to say something?
Yeah, we find that also that the king's chamberlains also were hurrying up. Like you said, everybody was hurrying because it sounds like he was hardly in his house very long, and boom, they came to get him to go to the banquet. So this makes me think that the king really had some insight at this point.
Right.
Okay. You know, he wasn't really like as stupid as we thought.
Well, are all of you surprised that all of a sudden his wife and his advisors are no longer supportive of him?
I don't know if they're not.
Well, maybe they're afraid they'll get.
I don't know,
Marilyn.
I'm saying I don't know if they're not supporters of him, but they're trying to tell him, listen, it's not going to work. No, your plan, because if he's Jewish, it's not gonna work.
Right.
And he won't listen to that because he still wants to do what he wants to do. But they're trying to tell him to do something else, and he won't listen because he's very determined.
Okay. Did someone else want to say anything?
Is there anything to the story of when he's leading Mordecai, his daughter?
That's midrash.
Okay.
Total midrash. And
Okay,
the
okay.
midrash, you know that midrash is created because of a word used here or there. And so then a story is created around that midrash. The midrash about his daughter, Haman's daughter, looks out onto the street, thinks that Mordecai is actually leading Haman on the horse, and she throws garbage and sewage on the head of the person leading the horse, which is actually her own father. When Haman looks up to see who did it, the daughter sees that that it's her father, so she falls out of the window and is killed. And then where that comes from is that it says that Haman returns home in mourning, like mourning for his daughter. So that's where the word mourning, when the text does say mourning, but it doesn't. He's mourning for himself. He's mourning for the situation. He's embarrassed. He's humiliated. He is at the lowest point because of the situation. We don't know anything about whether the daughter died or through sewage or whatever. Now, let's finish the chapter. Okay, so we're at the point where Haman is home. His advisors have just, unloaded on him that if Mordecai is Jewish, you really ought to abandon your plan here because you will not succeed. Now, clearly, Haman doesn't hear this as in any way the negative support, and it seems to be where the narrator or the narrative of the story is now talking about where ill fate and fortune comes in crashing down on Haman. And we see exactly at this point why believing in casting lots, throwing numbers out, or numbers of chance, that the outcome is of fate and fortune is not in our hands, that everything is up to God, and God is the one controlling it, not luck, not fortune, not a rolling of the dice. And it becomes Haman's plan comes crashing down on him because he has based everything on chance. So Haman's lots, or Haman's poor, becomes the Jews' Purim. You get the kind of subtlety there. His luck and chance becomes our refute of luck and chance by saying you don't base life on a roll of the dice. Now, before Haman has a chance to do anything in his home, there's a knock at the door. And what do we find in the last pasuk? The last pasuk 14, when they were still talking, Haman and his advisors and his wife are still talking about the day's activities, and there's a knock at the door, and it's the king's servants or chamberlain. And what have they come to do? They've come to take him. They've come to hurriedly, it says in there, hurriedly bring Haman to the banquet which Esther has arranged. So here again, a hurry. They're in a hurry to get him to the banquet, and they're in a hurry to fulfill the king's request to bring Haman. And at this, we know that this banquet is going to be different than the first banquet, because it says in the first banquet, that Esther prepared it for him. We're not sure who that him was, but now she has
Now we know.
prepared it for them. And she is escorted to the banquet by the king and Haman. Okay, the first banquet, she waited for the king and Haman to arrive. And now she is considered an equal, and she is walking to the banquet with the king and with Haman. The pace of events seems to generate a sense of urgency. And this is where Haman begins to feel overwhelmed and by the events. And he sees that things are spinning out of control for him. And from the moment he enters the king's chamber to the request of Mordecai's to request Mordecai's execution, Haman has totally lost control over his own fate. One scene hurries into the other, and we find now the three main characters are at the banquet, and something is going to happen at this point. So I hope that you will join us next week to find out what will be happening, or guess who's coming to dinner.
Right.
So have a good week.
As usual, great
Have
cheer.
a good Shabbat. And stay healthy.
Thank you,
and
Rhonda.
safe.
It's
Thank
terrific.
you.
Now,
Very
Thanks,
much.
Rhonda.
forward to seeing what
Thank
is
you.
going to happen
Hi,
in
Janice.
chapter 7.
Shabbat
Thank you.
shalom.
Thank you, Rhonda.
Rhonda, have a great week. It was a great cheer.
Thank you.
Everybody have a good week.
Is
Rhonda, I'll be
everybody
back in 2
speechless?
minutes. Rhonda.